The morning I age out of the system, the social worker handed me a manila envelope and a bus pass that expired in 48 hours. She did not say happy birthday. She did not hug me. She just glanced at her watch, told me my bed was needed by 2 p.m., and walked back to her car. I stood on the curb of Hartfield Group Home in the gray drizzle of an October Tuesday, 18 years old, holding everything I own in a single backpack and a plastic grocery bag. My name is Hazel Marrow, and until that morning, I had been state property for 14 years. My mother died when I was 4. The official cause was listed as cardiac arrest, which I learned later is what they write down when they do not really know. My father was gone before I was born, a name on a birth certificate and nothing more. After my mother passed, there was no one, no grandparents at the funeral, no aunts or uncles fighting over me at the courthouse. Just a caseworker with tired eyes and a stack of paperwork that would follow me through 8 different placements, 3 different schools, and 1 very long childhood. I had stopped believing in family by the time I was 9. By 12, I had stopped believing anyone was coming. By 15, I had stopped believing I deserved anyone to come. The manila envelope was not from the social worker. She had only been the courier. Inside was a letter on heavy ivory paper from a law firm I had never heard of in a town I had never been to. The header read Wickham and Pratt, attorneys at law, Willowmere, Vermont. The letter informed me that my grandmother, Adelaide Marrow, had passed away 3 years ago. It informed me that I was the sole beneficiary of her estate. It informed me that, per her explicit instructions, I was not to be notified until my 18th birthday, not 1 day sooner. It informed me that I had inherited a property at 22 Linden Street, a building she had owned and operated for 41 years. A funeral home, Marrow Daughters Funeral Home. The letter said, established 1962. I read that letter 4 times standing in the rain. A grandmother, a whole grandmother I had never met, who had owned a funeral home, who had known where I was for 14 years and had never once come for me, who had died 3 years ago and left instructions that I be kept in the dark until the law required someone to find me. I should have been furious. Some part of me was, but mostly standing in that drizzle with $63 to my name and nowhere to sleep that night. I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt chosen. Whoever Adelaide Marrow had been, she had remembered me. She had thought of me. She had left me something. And whatever the reason for her silence, whatever the reason no one had come, the fact remained that today, on the one day in my life when I had absolutely nothing, a stranger in Vermont had reached across the years and given me a key. I walked 6 blocks to the bus station. The ticket to Willowmere cost $48. That left me with $15 and a handful of change for 14 hours of travel. I did not think too hard about what would happen if the building was condemned, if the inheritance had legal complications, if I arrived in a town where no one knew me and found another locked door. I just bought the ticket and got on the bus. The drive took me out of the city, north through farm country turning gold and red with autumn, across the Connecticut River as the sun set behind the White Mountains, up into Vermont where the hills folded over each other like the pages of a closed book. I slept against the window. I dreamed of my mother, though I had almost forgotten her face. When I woke up, the bus was rattling down a 2-lane road through a covered wooden bridge, and a hand-painted sign read, "Welcome to Willowmere, population 2,847. The bus dropped me at a gas station at the edge of town just after 7 in the morning. The air was so cold and clean it almost hurt to breathe. The maples lining the street were on fire with color. Smoke rose from chimneys. A woman in a wool coat walked a small dog past me and nodded as if she had been expecting me. Main Street was 4 blocks long. A general store, a diner with frosted windows, a barber shop with a striped pole, a small white church at the far end with a bell tower that caught the morning light. The law office was above the post office. A creaky staircase up to a frosted glass door that read Wickham and Pratt. The man who opened the door was somewhere past 70, tall and thin with white hair brushed neatly to one side. He wore a wool vest over a button-down shirt and reading glasses on a silver chain. He looked at me for a long moment, and then his face did something I was not prepared for. His eyes filled with tears. "You have her hands," he said quietly. "Your grandmother's hands." I looked down at my own fingers, red from the cold. They were just hands, but the way he said it made my throat close. "I'm Edmund Pratt," he said, stepping back to let me in. "I have been waiting for you for 3 years. Please come in, Miss Marrow. There's a great deal you need to know." His office smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. Photographs lined one wall. Edmund as a younger man with various clients, certificates of legal practice, a picture of him in fishing waders holding a trout the size of a small dog. He poured me coffee from a percolator that looked older than I was and slid a manila folder across the desk. "Your grandmother," he began, "was the best friend I ever had. We grew up 2 blocks apart. She buried my wife. I drafted her will. She talked about you, Hazel, every single time I saw her for 14 years. Then why?" I said, my voice tighter than I wanted to be. "Did she never come?" Edmund took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked, in that moment, very tired. "Because she could not," he said. And by the time the obstacles were gone, it was too late. He told me, slowly and carefully, the story I had never been told. My mother's name was Marigold. She was Adelaide's only child. She had grown up in the apartment above the funeral home, learning the trade alongside her mother, helping prepare bodies and comfort families from the time she was old enough to hold a hand. But at 19, she had fallen in love with a man passing through town, a man my grandmother did not trust. They argued. They argued the way mothers and daughters can argue when both of them love each other too much to back down. Marigold left. She moved to the city with my father. Within a year, my father was gone, and within 4 years, my mother was dead. "Adelaide tried to get you," Edmund said. "The day she found out about your mother, she drove 8 hours straight to the city. She filed for custody. She hired 3 different attorneys over 5 years. She spent every dollar she had. Then why am I telling you this the first time at 18? Edmund's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Because there was someone working against her, he said quietly, someone with a personal stake in keeping her away from you. And until you read what is in that locked room on the 2nd floor of the funeral home, I cannot tell you the rest. Your grandmother left explicit instructions. Some things you have to discover for yourself." I looked at him for a long moment. "Room 3, I said. He nodded slowly. "She kept it locked for 31 years. Even I have never been inside." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small brass key on a green ribbon. The key was older than I was, worn smooth at the edges. "This is yours," he said. "She wanted you to be the one to open that door." The funeral home stood at the end of Linden Street, where the road curved and the hills came down to meet the water of a small lake. It was a Victorian, 3 stories tall, white clapboard with deep green shutters and a wraparound porch. A wooden sign hung from a wrought iron post by the front walk. Marrow Daughters Funeral Home, EST 1962. The paint was peeling. The hedges had grown wild. The lawn was knee-high in places. But the bones of the building were still strong, still graceful, still standing. Edmund handed me the front door key and said he would lead me to it. He would come check on me at sundown. There was a small apartment on the 3rd floor that had been my grandmother's. The electricity had been kept on, paid out of her estate. The furnace would need to be relit. The refrigerator was empty, but there were preserves in the pantry from her last summer. He paused on the porch steps before he left. "Hazel," he said, "whatever you find up there in room 3, whatever your grandmother was protecting, remember that she did it because she loved you. Everything she did was because she loved you." Then he walked back to his car, leaving me alone on the porch of a building I now apparently owned. The front door opened with a low groan. I stepped into a hush so complete it felt like the building had been holding its breath. The front parlor stretched to my left, with 2 long rooms separated by sliding pocket doors. Velvet drapes the color of dried roses. A piano against one wall, covered in a white sheet. Rows of folding chairs stacked neatly along the back. To the right, a small office with a roll-top desk and a filing cabinet, and a framed photograph of a woman in her 60s standing on these very front steps, her arms crossed, her smile wide, and a little defiant. My grandmother. I knew it without being told. She had silver hair pinned up in a knot, a long gray cardigan, and eyes the same shade of green as the ones I saw in the mirror every morning. I put my fingertips against the glass of the picture frame. I had her hands. Edmund had said so. I now saw I had her eyes, too. I had her stubborn jaw. I had a face that had been waiting somewhere in the world all along, and I had not known. I walked through the rest of the first floor slowly. The preparation room behind the office, scrupulously clean even after 3 years, all stainless steel and white tile. A small chapel with 8 pews, and a stained glass window of a willow tree by water. A sunroom at the back, full of plants long dead, looking out over the lake. The second floor had 4 rooms. Room 1 was a viewing parlor, smaller and more intimate than the ones downstairs. Room 2 was a family room, with couches and a coffee station, a place where people could gather between services. Room 4 was a storage room, full of carefully labeled boxes, guest registers 1988 to 1992, thank you cards, photographs J. Henderson family. Room 3 was at the end of the hall. The door looked the same as the others. Solid oak, brass knob, brass plate engraved with the number. But the lock was different, older, a keyhole large enough for the brass key in my pocket. The frame around the door was scuffed in a way that suggested a few people had tried, over the years, to get in. I stood in front of that door for a long time. Have you ever stood at a threshold knowing that whatever was on the other side was going to change you? Have you ever held a key in your hand and felt that turning it was going to crack your life into a before and an after? If this story is already pulling at something in you, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments, what is one door in your life you've been afraid to open? Sometimes the things we fear most are the ones holding the answers we have been waiting for. I slid the key into the lock. I turned it. The bolt slid back with sound like a small sigh. The door swung open into a room that, for a moment, made no sense to me at all. It was a child's bedroom. A single bed against the far wall, made up of the quilt patterned in tiny stars. A small wooden desk under the window with a couple of pencils, a stack of construction paper, a child's watercolor set, a bookshelf full of children's books, Charlotte's Web, The Velveteen Rabbit, What the Wild Things Are, a rocking chair in the corner with a folded blanket, a closet half open, full of small clothes still on hangers, size for a girl of maybe 4 or 5. And on every surface, the desk, the dresser, the windowsill, the walls, photographs of me as a baby in someone's arms, me at 3 with paint on my cheeks, me at 5 in a school portrait I had no memory of taking, me at 7 holding a soccer ball in a field I did not recognize, me at 10, 12, 15, 17, birthdays I had spent alone, awards I had won at school, assemblies no one had attended, school concerts, field trips, a picture of me at my high school graduation just 3 months ago, taken from too far away to make out my expression, but close enough to see that I was smiling. Someone had been watching me my entire life. Someone had been watching and remembering and saving every single image. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. I sat there for a long time, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child, the kind of crying that empties you out. I had not been alone. I had never been alone. There had been someone, all those years, who knew my name and where I lived and what I had been doing on a Tuesday afternoon in March of my 11th year. There had been someone keeping a record, keeping a room, keeping a place. When I finally lifted my head, I saw the box on the desk. It was a wooden box hand-carved, with a tiny willow tree inlaid on the lid. My name was on a folded card on top of it, written in handwriting I had never seen before, but somehow felt that I knew. For Hazel, when you finally come home. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them. The earliest dated the month after my mother died. The latest dated 3 weeks before my grandmother passed. I picked up the first one with hands that would not stop shaking. My dearest Hazel, today they would not let me have you. The judge said I was too old, that I lived too far away, that you had been placed, and it would be disruptive to move you. He said many things, all of which were lies and none of which mattered, because what mattered was that I walked out of that courthouse without you, and I do not know how I am supposed to live the rest of my life with that fact. I am writing this letter because I do not know what else to do. I will write you a letter every month, and I will keep them all, and someday, when the system spits you out the way it spits everyone out, You will come home and you will read them, and you will know that you were never, not for one single day, forgotten. I love you, my granddaughter. I will love you for as long as my heart beats, and after, Adelaide, I read every letter. It took me until the sun went down. Edmund knocked on the front door at some point, and I did not hear him. The letters told me about my grandmother's life, the funeral home, the family she served, the small joys and sorrows of 40 years in a small town. They told me about her efforts to find me, to contact me, to be allowed to send me birthday gift that the system kept returning marked no contact. They told me about the man who had blocked her at every turn, the man who had told the court she was unstable, who had whispered in caseworkers' ears, who had made sure my file carried notes that no judge in their right mind would override. That man's name was Roland Marrow, my grandmother's son, my mother's older brother, my uncle. I did not know I had an uncle. Edmund had not told me, because Edmund had been waiting for me to find the letters. But Roland Marrow existed, and according to the letters, he had been a problem since the day my mother was born. He was 16 years older than my mother. He had been my grandmother's son from her first marriage, before she met my grandfather, who died of a heart attack when my mother was 3. Roland had grown up resenting the funeral home, resenting the small town, resenting his mother for refusing to sell the family business, and moved to the city where he believed they could get rich. He had left at 18 and built himself into a real estate developer. He had specialized, my grandmother wrote, in buying up old buildings in dying New England towns, gutting them, and turning them into condominiums for weekenders from Boston and New York. He had wanted the funeral home for 30 years. He had wanted the lakefront, lot it sat on more. When my mother died, Roland had seen an opportunity. If my grandmother gained custody of me, the property would eventually go to me if she did not. And if Roland could prove that the elderly woman was unfit to raise a child, he could position himself as a responsible adult, take over her affairs, and eventually liquidate the building. He had spent 5 years and a lot of money working against my grandmother in family court. He had won, in the end, not because he wanted me. He had never wanted me. He had simply wanted me out of the way. My grandmother had figured all of this out, and she had documented it. The letters in room 3 were not just love letters. They were also a record. Bank statements showing the transfers Roland had made to a private investigator who had been feeding lies to my caseworker. Copies of letters Roland had written to the family court using a false name. A recording on an old cassette tape of a phone call Roland had made to my grandmother in the second year of the custody battle, in which he had told her, in language I will not repeat, that she would never see her granddaughter again because he would make sure of it. My grandmother had kept everything, and in the very last letter, written when she knew she was dying, she had written this: Hazel, I have made provisions. The funeral home goes to you, free and clear. Edmund has a deed, and the transfer is automatic on your 18th birthday. Roland will try to challenge it. He has been trying to challenge my will since the moment I was diagnosed. He will tell you I was not in my right mind. He will tell you the property is too much for you to handle. He will offer to buy you out for a sum that sounds enormous to a girl who has never had anything. Do not take it. This building is not just a building. It is 41 years of a town's grief and a family's love. It is where I held the hands of 312 widows. It is where I sat with 7 mothers who had lost children. It is where your great-grandfather is buried in a small cemetery out back, and where I will be buried when my time comes. It is yours, Hazel. It has always been yours. Do not let him take it. Be brave, my darling girl. I am sorry I could not be the one to tell you any of this in person, but I am with you. I have always been with you. I always will be. All my love, forever and ever, Grandma. I sat in that little room until the moon rose over the lake and silvered the floor in front of me. I sat there with 3 years of grief I had not known I needed to feel, with 14 years of loneliness that had finally been given a different shape, with a fury at a man I had never met that was hotter and brighter than anything I had ever felt before. When I finally went downstairs, Edmund was sitting on the front porch in the cold, waiting. He stood up when he saw me. You read them, he said. All of them. He nodded once. Then you know he is going to come. He is already on his way. He has alerts set up on the property records. The transfer triggered yesterday morning. He will be here by the end of the week. I looked out at the lake, at the moon on the water, at the small town that had been my grandmother's whole world. Then I have until the end of the week to figure out what I'm doing. I said, Edmund put his hand on my shoulder. You are not figuring it out alone, he said. Whatever you need, this town is yours. Adelaide made sure of that. The next morning, the town came to me. I had barely finished my first cup of coffee when there was a knock at the back door. A woman in her 70s with a long silver braid and a pie in her hands stood on the step. Her name was June Halloran. She had been my grandmother's best friend for 50 years. She told me she had been driving past every day for 3 years, watching the windows, waiting for the lights to come back on. She said she had sworn to Adelaide on her deathbed that the day a girl with green eyes walked into that house, June would be there with apple pie. June was crying. I was crying. We sat at the kitchen table and ate pie at 8 in the morning, and she told me about my grandmother, about the way she laughed too loud at funerals sometimes, about her habit of leaving a single white rose on every fresh grave in the town cemetery on the first of each month, about the way she had loved my mother fiercely and had never stopped grieving her. By noon, the diner owner, a woman named Tess, had brought me a casserole. By 2, an electrician named Wendell, who had been my grandfather's apprentice as a young man, came by to check the wiring just to make sure the place was ready. By 4, the minister from the small white church had stopped in to say that the town's grief counseling group, which had been the funeral home parlor twice a month for 30 years, would very much like to come back whenever I was ready. Have you ever walked into a place where strangers already know your name? Have you ever discovered that an entire community has been holding open a chair for you, just in case you ever showed up? If something in this story is making you feel a little less alone right now, let me know in the comments who held a chair for you in your life, even if you only realize it later. I would love to hear your story. And if you have not yet, please subscribe. These are the kind of stories I want to keep telling. By the end of my first week, I had met more people than I could remember the names of. I had also met a man named Theo Halloran, June's grandson, 23 years old, recently come home after 4 years in the Navy. He had taken over his grandfather's hardware store. He had a quiet way of showing up with a toolbox and fixing things without being asked, and a quieter way of looking at me across a room that I tried not to think about too directly. He was the one who was sitting on my porch, sanding down a porch railing on the 8th day after my arrival, when the silver Mercedes turned into the driveway. I knew who it was before he stepped out of the car. Roland Marrow was a tall man in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, with iron gray hair and the kind of expensive suit that does not actually fit anyone the way it is supposed to. He climbed the porch steps like he owned them. He looked at Theo, who did not stop sanding. He looked at me. "Hazel," he said. He smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. "I am your uncle. I have come a long way to meet you." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about everything I had read in those letters. I thought about my grandmother, sitting at her kitchen table, writing me month after month for 14 years while this man worked to keep her away from me. I thought about my mother. "Mr. Marrow," I said, "you are not invited onto this porch. Please get back in your car." His smile flickered. "I think there has been a misunderstanding. Whatever your grandmother told you about me, and I am sure she told you a great deal, was filtered through a very sick old woman's resentment. I am here because I am the only family you have left. I am here to help you. You are here because you want this building." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Of course I want the building. I am also a businessman. I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. But I am also offering you a way out of an impossible situation. You are 18 years old. You have no experience running a business. You have no money. The taxes alone on this property will bankrupt you within a year. I am prepared to offer you $450,000 today for the deed and contents. You can walk away with more money than most people see in a decade. You can go anywhere, be anyone." It was a lot of money. It was more money than I could fully imagine. I thought of the box upstairs, the room, the letters. "No," I said. Roland's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. The smile stayed in place. The eyes went somewhere very cold. "I see," he said. Then I should tell you that I have already retained counsel. There are significant questions about the validity of the will. My mother was not well at the end. She made decisions during that period that no responsible court will uphold. I am willing to be reasonable. I will give you another week to reconsider my offer. After that, we will be in court, and I assure you, Hazel, you do not want to be in court with me. He turned and walked back to his car. He paused at the bottom of the steps and looked back. Whatever she told you in those letters, he said, is the bitter version of an old woman who blamed me for her own poor choices. You did not know her. You do not know me. Take the money and start a real life. He drove away. The dust settled. Theo was still sanding the railing. He had not spoken once during the entire exchange. He looked up at me now. What do you need? He asked. A lawyer who is not afraid of him. I said, Edmund is not afraid of him. I need more than Edmund. Theo put down the sandpaper. Then we will find more. Edmund and I drove to Burlington on a Thursday morning. Leaving Willowmere before the sun had fully cleared the tree line. The drive took just under 2 hours, and we barely spoke. Edmund kept both hands on the wheel and let the silence be what it was. I watched the hills roll past a window and thought about my grandmother. Not the woman in the photograph on the parlor wall, formal and composed, but a woman who had sat at a kitchen table and written letters for decades, who had saved a cassette tape in a shoebox, who had kept a room ready for a child she'd been forbidden to see. The attorney's name was Priya Whitehall. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and the waiting room smelled like coffee and old paper and something faintly floral that I could not identify. She was younger than I expected, early 40s perhaps, with dark hair pulled back and reading glasses she kept taking on and off as she spoke. She did not waste time on pleasantries. She read through everything we had brought. The will, the medical records documenting my grandmother's mental clarity in her final months, and finally the cassette tape, which she listened to all the way through without moving, her expression unreadable. When it ended, she set the recorder down very carefully on her desk. Miss Marrow, she said, your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. She built a case against her own son 30 years ago, in case she ever needed it. She paused, and when she continued, her voice had shifted into something more deliberate. We are going to win this. I want you to understand that before we go any further. The will is airtight. The medical documentation is clean. And what your grandmother left behind in the way of evidence about your uncle's interference in your custody is, frankly, the kind of thing that does not just defeat his challenge. It opens up significant civil liability against him personally. I sat very still in the chair across from her desk. She was telling me that my grandmother had been preparing for this for 30 years. 30 years of quiet, methodical, patient preparation. 30 years of gathering evidence and updating records and keeping everything organized and dated and ready, not because she was certain she would need it, but because she intended to be ready if she did. I thought about what kind of discipline that took, what kind of love. I am telling you, Priya continued, that your grandmother was the most strategic client I have ever read the records of, and I am telling you that we are not just going to defend the will. She looked at me steadily. If you would like, we are going to make sure your uncle answers for what he did to her, and to you. The room was quiet. Outside the window, Burlington went about its morning. I thought about the letters. I thought about the room on the 2nd floor. I thought about 14 years of believing no one was looking for me, 14 years of group homes and temporary placements and social workers who meant well and systems that did not, 14 years of learning to need nothing, because needing things was a form of hoping, and hoping too much was the quickest way to be destroyed. I thought about the woman who had been hoping for me the entire time. Yes, I said, I want an answer for it. Priya nodded once, without ceremony. Then we begin Monday. Roland filed his challenge to the will on a Wednesday. He had hired a firm from out of state. 3 attorneys, which I later learned he could barely afford, because his finances were not in the shape his reputation suggested. By Friday, our countersuit had been filed and served. By the following Tuesday, the local paper in his home county had run a story citing public court documents about the nature of the countersuit, the interference in custody, the recorded calls, the decades of deliberate separation, and 3 of his real estate investors had quietly pulled out a development project he was trying to close. I did not follow the coverage closely. Edmund did, and gave me summaries when something significant happened, but I had decided early on that I was not going to spend the weeks before the hearing refreshing news pages and reading comment sections. Instead, I spent that time learning the funeral home. I went through my grandmother's binders in the evenings, page by page. I walked every room of the building during the days. I introduced myself to the families who had standing arrangements, to the florist she had worked with for 20 years, to the stone carver 2 towns over who cut her monuments. I was building something. I was learning the shape of what she had left me. I did not want to arrive at the hearing, still holding it like something borrowed. I wanted it to already be mine. Roland came back to the funeral home one more time, 2 weeks before the hearing date. He did not get out of his car. He sat in the driveway for a long time, 10 minutes, perhaps a little longer, and looked at the building. I was in the front parlor when I heard the car pull up, and I moved the window and watched him from behind the curtain. He was older looking than I had expected from the photograph Edmund had shown me. Smaller. Somehow, he sat behind the wheel with both hands in his lap and looked at the building his mother had built, the building she had refused to leave him, and I watched his face and could not read what was in it. It might have been grief. It might have been calculation. I have worked with grieving people long enough now to know that the two can look almost identical from the outside. After 10 minutes, he drove away. I watched his car until it disappeared around the turn at the end of the block, and then I let the curtain fall and went back to what I had been doing. His attorneys settled with us out of court 4 days later. He withdrew his challenge to the will entirely. He agreed to a substantial civil payment, the amount which I am not going to write here, but which was meaningful enough that I was able to put the majority of it into a trust designated for the funeral home's long-term operation, repairs, and staffing, and meaningful enough that I was able to direct a significant portion to a nonprofit based in Burlington that provided transitional housing and support for young people aging out of the foster care system in Vermont. I thought my grandmother would have approved of that. I thought she would have approved of the whole arrangement. Actually, not because she wanted money from her son, but because she had always understood that accountability without consequences is not really accountability at all. He also agreed, as a condition of the settlement, never to set foot in Willowmere again. He did not apologize. I had not expected him to. An apology would have required him to understand what he had done, and I was not sure he was capable of that, and I had decided it did not matter. The settlement was the apology, rendered in the only language he had ever truly spoken. The hearing was canceled. The matter was closed. Edmund shook my hand outside his office that afternoon with both of his, the way older men do when they're trying to say something larger than a handshake can hold. I thanked him. I walked out onto Main Street and stood in the November air for a long time, breathing it in, and I thought, I am 18 years old. I am the owner of a funeral home. I have won a legal battle against a man who spent 30 years trying to make sure I did not exist. And I have never in my entire life been less alone than I am right now. 6 months later, I held my first service. The deceased was a man named Peter Gilroy, 84 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had taught in Willowmere for 31 years, long enough that half the people at the service had once been his students. June walked me through every step of the preparation. So did Bertrand, a funeral director from the next town over who had known my grandmother for decades and who had agreed, without hesitation, to take me on as an apprentice for as long as I needed. So did my grandmother's binders, which I had read so many times by then that certain passages had begun to feel like a voice I could actually hear, her handwriting careful and precise, her notes on every detail of the process, from the first phone call with a grieving family to the last car leaving the cemetery. How to greet a family who has just lost someone. She had written 2 full pages on this. Not a script. She had been clear about that, had underlined it twice, but an orientation. You are not there to manage their grief. You are there to hold the space for it. There is a difference. I was terrified going in. I stood outside the front door of the parlor 20 minutes before the family was due to arrive, breathing slowly, going through everything I had prepared. And then I opened the door and they came in, and something shifted. By the end of the service, I was something other than terrified. I was useful. I was present. I was, in ways I had not anticipated and could not fully explain, good at this. It turned out that a childhood defined by too much grief and too little comfort had left me with something I had never thought of as an asset. I knew how to sit with people who were in pain without trying to fix them or move them along. I knew how to let a room be quiet when quiet was what it needed. I had learned very young that silence between people who are suffering is not awkward or empty. It is a form of presence, and presence is what the bereaved need most. I had spent 14 years learning that lesson the hard way, and now it was serving me in ways I had never expected. Mrs. Gilroy held my face in her hands at the door after service. She was a small woman with white hair and eyes that had been crying for days, but were very clear. She said, "You are your grandmother's granddaughter. She would be so proud of you." I did not cry until after everyone had gone home. I sat in the empty parlor in the quiet and let it come, and it was not entirely sadness. It was also something that I did not have a name for yet, something that felt like arriving, like recognition, like finally being in the right place at the right time after a very long journey to get there. I am 23 years old now. 5 years have passed since I stepped off that bus with a duffel bag and a folded piece of paper with an address on it. The funeral home has been fully restored. The clapboard is freshly painted. The hedges along the front walk are trimmed. The porch boards that had gone soft have been replaced, and the stained glass panel above the front door that had cracked sometime in the 90s has been repaired by an artisan in Montpelier, who works only with original methods. The sign by the front walk reads Marrow Daughters Funeral Home, EST 1962, H, Marrow, Director, and I am the H. Marrow refers to now, though it still feels sometimes like the sign belongs to her more than to me, and I have decided I do not mind that. I do not need my name to be separate from hers. I am content to carry it forward. I have served 217 families. Each of them is in a ledger my grandmother started in 1962, her handwriting giving way eventually to mine, the dates and names running across 40 years, and then 5 more. I have buried Edmund, who passed 2 winters ago at 86 with his books around him and his cat at the foot of bed, and I laid a single white rose on his casket, because that is what my grandmother would have done, and I think he would have known what it meant. I have buried June's husband, Bernard, a quiet man who had loved her for 51 years, and who deserved every word she said about him at his service. I have buried strangers who became, in the days I spent with their families, something more than strangers. I have also, in the last year, married Theo Halloran, who came to Willowmere originally to do a 6-month residency at the Historical Society, and who stayed, as people sometimes do, because the place got into him. We had a small ceremony in the chapel here at the funeral home, which felt right in a way I find difficult to explain to people who have not spent time in rooms where both endings and beginnings are understood. June walked me down the aisle. We live in the apartment on the 3rd floor, in the rooms that used to be my grandmother's, where her books are still on the shelves, and where I wake up some mornings and lie still for a moment imagining I can feel her in the building the way you can feel weather coming. We are expecting our first child in the spring. If it is a girl, we will name her Marigold. Room 3 is no longer locked. I unlocked it the winter after I moved in, after the settlement, after the first service, when I had been in Willowmere long enough to feel that I had a right to all of it. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I went in. The room was exactly as Edmund had described and exactly as the photograph had shown. The small bed with the quilt, the watercolor set on the desk, still wrapped in its original packaging. The books arranged on the shelf by height, the closet with the small clothes hanging in a row, size for a child of 4 or 5. I sat in the rocking chair by the window for a long time. I did not change anything. I have not changed anything since. The room remains as she arranged it, and I go in sometimes and sit in the rocking chair and think. I think about a woman who built a room for a granddaughter she was not allowed to have, and then kept it ready, and kept it ready, and kept it ready for 31 years. I think about that specific quality of hope, not the bright, easy hope of early expectation, but the worn, patient, daily hope of someone who's been told no so many times they have stopped expecting yes, and simply decided to be ready anyway. I think about love, about the forms it takes when the ordinary forms are blocked, the letters that go unanswered, the phone calls that are intercepted, the doors that are closed, how it does not stop, how it finds other shapes, how it builds rooms and writes binders and saves cassette tapes in shoe boxes and waits, without any guarantee. for a day that may never come. I think about the people walking around in this world right now who believe they are unloved, unclaimed, unchosen, who have been told, by circumstances, by systems, by the silences of people who should have spoken, that no one is holding a place for them. I was one of those people for 14 years. I know exactly what that belief does to a person, how it settles into bones, how it shapes every choice and every relationship and every room you walk into. And I want to say, as plainly as I can, the silence in your life is not always the truth of your life. Sometimes there is a letter that has not arrived yet. Sometimes there is a door that is locked but not abandoned. Sometimes there is a woman you have never met who has been writing your name in a ledger for 30 years, who has been keeping a room clean and a light on and a rocking chair by the window, who has been saying to herself every day, she is coming. She will find her way. I will be ready. Keep walking. Get on the bus. Open the door. Someone is on the other side of it. Someone has been there for a very long time. You just have not found the key yet.